Good morning, everyone. Before we start, this webinar will be recorded for quality assurance and marketing purposes down the line. If you would like to log out, please take the time to do so now. If you have any questions, please feel free to wait to the very end. We would do questions and answers at the end of the presentation. Now, welcome everyone to our CyberMinds Consulting Genesis webinar. My name is Matthew. I'm the marketing lead here at CyberMinds. Let's begin with who we are. So here at CyberMinds, we're a boutique firm based out of Brooklyn, New York, offering niche cyber advisory services to mid-sized enterprises. Conceptualized and founded in August 2020 by Daruwalla, who will be taking over in quite a few, managing members with decades of experience in delivering complex technology and security transformation programs across vertical markets. Our portfolio of cyber advisory services offerings are all geared towards tackling the modern day challenges faced by the business and cyber teams. These challenges such as zero trust, insider threat, and so forth. This slide is kind of wordy, so instead of walking you through a slideshow, we're going to present a 3-minute video that explains these challenges. Following the video, Benazir will take over and talk you through our approach to solving these problems.
In the face of increasing frequency and complexity across the threat landscape, coupled with the unavoidable imposition of new ways of working triggered by the coronavirus pandemic, it certainly doesn't feel like a year with a lot of upside. Budgets are threatened in the face of competition for spend from other areas of corporate infrastructure, at a time where the cyber threat demand is going through the roof as new policies get implemented. Sophisticated threat landscape, increasing regulations, economic outlook, and competition are placing significant constraints on enterprises' budgets and resources. With cybersecurity on top of everyone's mind, boards are getting increasingly skeptical and are demanding a stronger evidence between the annual cyber spend and the firm's risk posture. Meanwhile, the CISO teams are constantly adjusting to the latest industry trends around attack vectors, competing business priorities, and a constant demand for additional spend on people. Little effort is spent in creating the right level of documentation that demonstrate visible linkages between cyber investments and business value that can be measured and confidently communicated. Security assessments and maturity-based models, often a de facto standard for organizations to assess cyber gaps, do not always guarantee risk reduction within strategic and critical aspects of business. For the 21st century CISO, guesswork is no longer an option. Introducing CyberMinds Consulting's Business Threat Risk Analyzer Fabric, a unique approach to solving the corporate cyber conundrum. The fabric unifies context-driven methodology with data-driven framework to help organizations realign their cyber backlogs with controls that mitigate the most significant risks. Built on industry standards and common sense techniques, the fabric enables a top-down, business-aligned approach. So rather than rely on SOC and other operational platforms as a focal point for visibility for their cyber strategy, enterprises can perform end-to-end analysis across the entire business stack. By infusing business context, corporate leaders can confidently invest in modern controls that create sustainable, actualized value to the business. With documented traceability between critical business functions, infrastructure, threats, risks, and controls at a strategic and operational level, business, technology, and cyber leaders can take the ambiguity and guesswork out of decision-making and focus on predictive outcomes. The fabric's risk-based proactive approach can help enterprises reprioritize their cyber backlogs by targeting up to 70% reduction in inherent risks at same or lesser cost. Infuse business intelligence into your cyber plan with CyberMinds Consulting, where business meets cyber.
Thank you, Matt, for kicking us off today. I know this is your first session as a host, so well done. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. My name is Benazir Daruwalla. I am the founder and principal partner at CyberMinds Consulting. I really appreciate your time today. Before I get into the details of the fabric that we're going to talk about today, I wanted to just spend a few moments talking about some of the thoughts that were expressed in the video you just saw, specifically around two key areas that are critical to the discussion for us within the next 20 minutes. Traditionally, let's talk about the first point. So traditionally, enterprises, mostly cybersecurity organizations, rely on operational mechanisms, assessments, and SOC platforms as a means of identifying cyber gaps and using those cyber gaps as a means of finding opportunities for further cybersecurity investments. Now, for most part, these assessments do work. These assessments are critical and important. But when it comes to addressing the most significant risks, some of these approaches fall short because these approaches do not holistically take into consideration an organizational context. As you know, that as enterprises continue to digitize, there is an undeniable need for increased cyber spend annually. So there's no debate about the need for additional investment in cybersecurity. However, that additional investment is coming from the expense and cost of other corporate investments. As a result, the business leaders and the board of directors are constantly demanding a stronger evidence between the firm's cyber spend and the corresponding contribution to the firm's risk posture, specifically when we are talking about the critical aspects of the business. Meanwhile, the CISO teams are constantly struggling and battling with the emerging attack vectors, the competing business priorities, and a constant demand for additional spend of people. Little to no effort is spent in creating the right level of documentation that provides visible linkages between what cyber investments are in place versus how their cyber investments are contributing to the firm's cyber risk posture, specifically as it relates to critical business processes and functions. Hence the benefit of a fabric. So just to give you a quick idea, not only does a fabric revitalize and contextualize your cyber plans, the fabric can also help you visualize linkages between your control implementation back to the business value. Now let's talk about the second point. There seems to be a universal agreement among all the industry experts and organizations that cybersecurity is a business problem. If that is the case, then why not enable the corporate leaders with the right level of visibility so that they are a part of the decision-making process when it comes to what and how they want to invest in cyber, and do so in a language they can clearly understand. So that's another benefit of Fabric. Not only does it allow us to provide linkages between the controls implementation and business value, it also enables organizations with a universal language that could be easily understood by the technical personnel as well as the non-technical personnel. Now, what we have leverage here as a fabric is something that we utilize across all the cyber advisory services we offer in our portfolio. Matt showed you that slide a minute ago. Everything that we do within CyberMinds Consulting in terms of our services uses some aspect of the fabric as a part of the delivery mechanism. I also wanted to maybe emphasize a little more on one objection I hear very often from whoever I have discussed the fabric with. The fabric, for example, I was talking to an ex-CISO and he made a comment, hey, we've seen this concentric circles before. We are leveraging all the standards that you provide within the fabric. What's so unique about your fabric? And my response to that person is, yes, we do. You may have seen this before. It's very common because it leverages industry best practices and standards. But what's so unique about the fabric is it enables an outside-in, top-down aligned view, our perspectives, by bringing the strategic, tactical, and operational aspects of business and technology together in a way that makes sense to the corporate leaders with outcomes that are pragmatic, effective, and relevant. And hopefully by the end of this conversation, you may have some level of clarity around what I mean by saying an outcome-driven, outside-in, top-down approach to implementing your cyber strategies and cyber plans. Now, everything within the fabric starts with the business context. The common in NIST standard and other risk management standards, they define business context as the way you categorize your system or where you categorize your data, right? In our language, business context is not just categorization of systems and data, it goes beyond the categorization of systems and data. And what I mean by that is, when we talk about organizational context, it's about the processes, the procedures, and the artifacts that exist within the organization in order to create existential value. A common example of an artifact that defines or that we derive as a part of the organizational context could be your corporate priorities, your corporate strategy documents, your IT strategies, your cybersecurity strategies, assessments, and maturity models, your business continuity plan. The business continuity plan is very critical because it encapsulates critical business processes and functions, which is very important when you're looking at applying cybersecurity or planning around cybersecurity. Example would be asset inventory. So all these artifacts not only allow us to gain visibility into the organizational maturity in the way they handle cyber thinking, but it also allows us to provide proactive feedback on day one. So rather than give you the feedback at the end of the engagement, later during the process, these documents give us upfront visibility into things that are working well within the organization, areas where they need improvement so that they can take immediate action or reprioritize it or consider additional work, so on and so forth. So the organizational context gives us full visibility into the priorities in terms of business, technology, as well as cyber, and the ability of the organization to infuse business intelligence and cyber thinking and vice versa. The context that we gather feeds into our methodology, okay? Think about the methodology as a way we contextualize the fabric, and we consider that as a playbook. So basically, it has all the processes and steps that need to get executed in order to make the fabric operational within an organization. We leverage the methodology to perform collaborative techniques and phases along an engagement timeline. We start by creating what we call as a business architectural model. Think about business architectural model as a blueprint that links your critical business processes and functions and activity down to the underlying systems, data, as well as infrastructure. The infrastructure could be on-prem, it could be off-prem, or it could be running somewhere on cloud providers. So we combine and link all your critical business processes and functions with the underlying systems and the underlying infrastructure that support the systems. Now, one thing I want to note down here is we do not do this business architectural modeling for all your business processes and functions. It's practically impossible to do so. What we do is we pick up 4 or 5 critical business processes and functions in the beginning of the engagement, and we apply the methodology across for those 4 or 5 critical business processes and functions, right? The methodology then creates a business architectural model. We ingest the business architectural model into our threat and risk analysis exercise. Now, the threat and risk analysis exercise is basically a 2-step process. The first step focuses on threat analysis. Within the threat analysis, we identify all the potential threat exposures related to the business architectural model, okay? The risk analysis exercise takes it to the next level. It identifies the likelihood of the threats occurring within the organizational context and associates it with business impact and consequences. So in essence, a business risk. The business risk allows us to prioritize and quantify the risk so that we can feed that into the control analysis process. So the outcome of threat and risk analysis is a list of prioritized risk inventory, which is fed into the controls analysis. The controls analysis process would consider all the mitigation controls needed to mitigate the most significant risks. And those actions are then documented within a risk management and mitigation action plan. Very standard technique that is used by almost everybody today. in order to derive and link business context down to risk mitigation action. The entire methodology takes about 12 to 15 weeks, depending on the scope. But what's unique about a methodology that other vendors do not follow is this. The methodology leverages a metadata-driven framework through the process. And I'm going to talk about what that metadata-driven framework entails within the context of the fabric. As next. Now, the metadata-driven framework is a circle that you see that encapsulates the business taxonomy, threat catalog, and the controls catalog. This is our intellectual property. We have invested significant time and effort in creating predefined set of assets and accelerators that could be leveraged by the methodology so that we can deliver in a progressive, standard, and a holistic manner across all our cyber advisory services. Each of those assets that we have built within CyberMinds Consulting is categorized by industry sector. Now, every industry is different. Healthcare has a different set of problems or challenges when it comes to threats compared to a financial services market, right? So our assets are categorized by industry sector. Our assets are categorized by various threat categories of relevance. And they're also categorized based on industry use cases. For example, you hear common modern controls around zero trust. We are hearing constantly about new controls that need to be implemented for ransomware. So not only are these assets categorized by industry sector and threat categories, they also are further categorized based on specific use cases that you want to solve or the challenges you want to mitigate. All our assets are based on industry standards and common sense techniques. What I mean by common sense techniques, I'll get to when we talk a little more in detail. But everything that we are doing is based on commonly accepted industry standards. That is something that you can present to both the cyber and non-cyber audience, which is very critical, right? To be able to communicate confidently the value of your cyber investments and connect it back to the business value, you need to do it in a way that could be communicated and understood by both the technical and non-technical audience. So the bottom line is everything that we are putting forward is in the language of a simplicity and the language that could be understood by your corporate leaders as well as your cyber leaders and your operations teams. So let's talk a little bit about what those assets entail. Let's talk about the business taxonomy. So business taxonomy is nothing but a business glossary of metadata. Okay, this metadata is leveraged when we are creating models within the methodology, and the metadata is a glue to linking business taxonomy with the threat catalog and the controls catalog. It's a very critical, important component of this entire fabric. The business taxonomy also includes templates, right? So we know there is publicly available information around the critical business processes and functions within financial sector versus within healthcare or within energy and utility industry. So what we have done is we have encapsulated all those templates as baseline for processes and functions that we could leverage during our engagements and customize it based on the specific enterprise or organizational context. These templates are also enriched after every engagement. So after every engagement, we get smarter and we enrich these templates. Of course, we do not have any sensitive data within the templates. The templates are basically nothing but blueprints around processes, functions, and the underlying ways by which these processes and functions work together to deliver on a specific use case. The next important.
Hey, Benazir, I'm sorry. We have a little less than 10 minutes for the Q&As at the end.
Oh, okay. There's a lot to finish. I'll try to wrap up in 10 minutes.
Okay.
Then what we have is an important component called as a threat catalog. So the threat catalog basically is a repository of all the historical and the latest attack vectors and data breaches that have occurred. We've categorized it by industry vertical, as well as, of course, it has an underlying predefined metadata as well. Our catalog is again mapped based on threats and the business impact and consequences of those threats. as well as mapped to controls for mitigation. So basically, the threat catalog is a holistic view into the threat categories per industry sector, the business impact and consequences of every threat that occurs, as well as how you can mitigate those threats through appropriate controls. In some cases, we have also mapped the threat catalog to Metadata. So if you guys are using Metadata for understanding the techniques and the procedures that the hackers use, then for cases that are for threat categories where there's available data, we have attempted to also map it to Metadata framework. Then the controls catalog. The controls catalog is a rationalized list of all the potential controls based on best practice frameworks. Basically, the focus of controls catalog is to take away the ambiguity away from overlapping frameworks. It is again categorized by use cases. So we have a bunch of controls for example, addressing zero trust, for ransomware, for supply chain attacks, etc. The controls are not only categorized based on the use cases, they're also categorized based on the efficacy and the type. So what we mean by efficacy is there might be one control that might have very high efficacy within one industry compared to the efficacy rate in another industry. The type is the different kinds of controls you need to implement in order to create an effective defense. And those controls could be cyber controls that are that the CISO teams are accountable for. It could be the tech controls that the CIO teams are accountable for, or it could be simple process or procedural controls that a privacy officer might be accountable for. So the controls are not just focused on cyber controls. The controls holistically encapsulate operational, process, technology, and cyber controls so that you can have that shared responsibility model between business, technology, cyber, and even third-party vendors if they are a part of the ecosystem. Now, as I mentioned earlier, everything that we do is based on industry standards and framework. We also use within the fabric, we focus on Open FAIR Institute, Open FAIR for quantitative risk modeling. We use NIST and CSA for controls framework. NIST, of course, for enterprise. CSA is for Cloud Security Alliance, which is used mostly for cloud controls. We use Metadata where applicable for techniques and procedures, tactics, techniques, and procedures. And then we also have integration with operational threat intelligence platforms so that you get real-time visibility, not only into the historical threat vectors that have occurred, but also what's happening right now as we speak. So we get information from threat platforms for vendor risk, for vulnerabilities, as well as for the ongoing attack vectors as they are happening. I'm going to quickly get into the fabric execution process. Because we are short on time, let me quickly go through some slides. So this is the high-level process that we perform as a part of a methodology, which starts with the business model. So as I mentioned, the business model is basically an architecture that links critical business processes and functions down to the systems, data, and the underlying infrastructure that supports it. We use this business architecture model and we overlay our threat catalog on the business architecture model that will help us identify the potential threats. Now, of course, you have all these threats that are exposed to your business architecture, but not all threats might be relevant within your organizational context because some of the threats you already covered with your current control implementation plan. Some threats may not likely occur because it's not relevant within your organizational context. So basically, the next step after threat analysis is to ensure that we address threats that are likelihood to occur within the organization through our risk analysis process. And that risk analysis process is very exhaustive, and it will help us quantify the identified risks so that it could be leveraged from a prioritization point of view so that you can have an informed decision on what you want to mitigate on day one. The controls analysis exercise will list all the potential controls along with the efficacy that is required to mitigate the specific threats within the risk tolerance that business has set, of course. And those controls, the controls directly map back to the business model I showed you earlier, right? So when you complete this methodology, you come up at a point where you have a list of prioritized controls identified that you want to execute as a part of your action plan, but they also link back to what threats they were mitigating in your business architecture that directly influence the business value. So as you can see, it's an end-to-end structured approach, as well as various methods and common sense techniques that allow you to link your control implementation back to the business value or the business process and functions it supports. Just to end up with our differentiation quickly, we are the first of a kind, risk-based, pragmatic, measurable approach. Of course, there are a lot of vendors out there who do bits and pieces of everything, but there's no vendor out there, at least to my knowledge, that can do the entire process in its entirety in the way we execute via our fabric. We just don't focus on what you need to do. We also give equal weightage to how you need to execute successfully. Of course, we are a small boutique firm, so we are very selective to who we work with at a cost, at a fraction of the cost, of course, charged by the Big Four. And we always bring team A in front of you, right? So our team will be right on your face, right from negotiations down to the delivery. We validate what you have. Now, we're not going to be recreating strategies from ground up for you. We validate what you have. We contextualize it and we make it more relevant within your organizational context. There's some additional reference material that are out there on our website and on LinkedIn. Feel free to access it at your leisure. I'm going to stop there and sorry, Matt, I hand you the control.
It's okay. Thank you, Benazir. We have a few questions through the email. Someone asks, can you provide some details on your risk analysis?
Yeah, so our risk analysis leverages the risk quantitative models as promoted by the FAIR Institute. What we have done is we have curated all the publicly information out there, specifically from reports like Verizon's DBIR or IBM's cost of breach studies. We have curated all that information based on industry sector, threat categories, and then we have quantified it based on the likelihood of occurrence based on various criteria that would be relevant within the organization. So the amount of information that we have collected spans about 5 years, so that organizations can make an informed decisions around what risk are likelihood to occur within the organizational context, what is a quantification of the risk, what's the risk appetite, and how they want to mitigate it going forward. Any other questions?
There's another question. You kind of touched bases on this, but the question is, how do your clients leverage this fabric? And is it offered as a solution or is it part of a service?
Yeah, so the fabric basically is utilized as a part of our service offerings. So we use it internally within CyberMinds Consulting to deliver on our services. Our goal eventually is to also productize the fabric so that the corporate leaders can use it to simulate threat, risk, and controls across the business stack. Of course, there will be some elements of the fabric that we won't be able to automate because it requires manual inputs and human intervention when it comes to ingesting organizational context. But for most part, the fabric can be automated. Our vision is to productize it as a service. So basically provide a solution as a service, completely hosted in cloud native environment. But again, that's a future. We see that something happening somewhere between 6 to 8 months down the line. Anything else?
That's it for the questions on the email. Are there any other questions, guys? Okay. So if you did have any questions, you guys can email us at, email Benazir at benazir.d@cybermindsolutions.com or ask away on our website at cybermindsolutions.com.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you all.